The snow wasn't just cold, it was a physical weight. A white tomb pressing the oxygen out of Maya's lungs while the black industrial tape sliced into the corners of her mouth. Beside her, buried vertically in the same frozen hell, Bane's muffled whimpers vibrated through the ice, a decorated K9 reduced to a rhythmic plea for mercy. This wasn't a rescue mission anymore. It was an execution by nature. Was the elite Navy SEAL training enough to survive being buried alive? Or was the heartbeat fading in the snow already too late? Before we dive into this harrowing journey of survival and betrayal, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell. Follow this story until the very last second. You won't believe the twist waiting at the end. Also, drop a comment below letting me know which city or country you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories of courage travel across the globe. The static on the radio was the first sign that the world had turned predatory. Maya Vance gripped the steering wheel of her tactical SUV, her knuckles white. "Elias, do you copy? The coordinates for the Crown of Pine perimeter are ghosting. Everything is white out. Respond." Nothing but the hiss of the storm. Beside her, Bane, the Belgian Malinois, let out a low, guttural vibration that wasn't quite a growl. It was a warning. "I know, boy," Maya whispered, her voice rasping. "Something feels wrong." Suddenly, a massive shape lunged from the tree line. Maya slammed the brakes, the SUV fishtailing violently on the black ice. A man stood in the middle of the road, drenched in blood, now waving his arms frantically. "Help! They're killing them! The basement! They locked the children in the basement!" the man screamed, his voice cracking against the wind. Maya didn't hesitate. She vaulted out of the vehicle, Bane at her heels. "Sir, stay calm. I'm a federal officer. Who is attacking?" The man pointed toward an old, dilapidated quarry office. "Inside, please." As Maya stepped onto the porch, the floorboards didn't creak. They collapsed. It was a trap. A flashbang detonated, blinding her in a searing white veil. She reached for her sidearm, but a heavy boot slammed into her wrist. Bones snapped. She cried out, the sound swallowed by the howling wind. "Bane, attack!" she managed to gasp. She heard the roar of the Malinois, then the sickening thud of a tranquilizer dart. "No!" Maya screamed, struggling to stand as 3 men in tactical winter gear swarmed her. "Target secured," a cold, familiar voice echoed. "Let's put them on ice." Literally. Maya looked up, her vision blurring. It was Mason, her own backup, her brother in arms. "Mason. Why?" He didn't answer. He simply knelt and pressed a strip of heavy black tape over her mouth, sealing her questions into a suffocating silence. The transition from the world of light to the world of ice was brutal. Maya felt herself being dragged, her boots scuffing the frozen earth. They reached the edge of the quarry where the snow had drifted 10 feet deep. "Dig the holes vertical," Mason commanded. "If they're upright, the chest compression from the snowpack kills them slower." I want her to think about every lie she told the department. Maya thrashed, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. They tossed her into a narrow, deep trench. The cold hit her like a physical blow. Then came the snow. Shovel after shovel of heavy, wet slush poured over her shoulders. "Look at your dog, Maya," Mason sneered, leaning over the edge of the pit. 2 feet away, Bane was being lowered into a parallel hole. The dog's eyes were wide, fixed on Maya. He wasn't fighting for himself. He was trying to reach her. When the snow reached Maya's chin, Mason stopped. "In 2 hours, the blizzard will cover your heads completely. No one finds a needle in a haystack and no one finds a seal in a snowbank. Goodbye, partner. The sound of the SUV driving away was the loneliest noise Maya had ever heard. Silence descended, broken only by the whistling wind. Maya focused on her breathing. Shallow, rhythmic. SEAL training. Survival is a game of inches. She tried to move her arms, but the snow had already begun to pack into ice, locking her limbs in place. Thump, thump. A vibration came from the ice to her left. Bane. He was hitting the wall of his snow prison with his head. Mmph. Maya tried to shout through the tape. Stay still, Bane. Save your oxygen. But the dog wouldn't stop. He knew she was fading. The temperature was dropping. Maya felt the telltale sting of hypothermia, the mumbles, creeping into her brain. Her thoughts began to drift to the mission. The Crown of Pine wasn't a cult. It was a front for a multi-million-dollar human trafficking ring involving high-ranking officials. Mason wasn't just a traitor. He was the gatekeeper. Suddenly, the ground vibrated. A different sound. Not a dog. An engine. Hope surged through her. A shot of adrenaline that burned like fire. Elias? Is that you? A figure appeared at the edge of the quarry. He was tall, wearing a heavy rescue parka, but he wasn't looking at the ground. He was looking at a GPS tracker. I don't see them! The man shouted into his radio. It was Elias. The signal died right here. Mason said she headed north, but the tracks end at the quarry. Maya tried to scream, but the tape held firm. She tried to throw her head back, to catch the light, but the snow had risen to her lower lip. Elias, look down! She screamed in her mind. Elias walked within 3 feet of her head. The wind was so loud he couldn't hear the muffled groans. He turned his back to her, looking out over the cliff. There's nothing here but a drift. I'm heading to the lakeside. She must have skidded off the pier. No! Maya's eyes filled with tears that froze instantly on her cheeks. Elias, turn around. As Elias began to walk away, a sudden piercing sound tore through the wind. Arro! It was a howl, not a bark, but a primal, mournful cry that vibrated through the very crust of the earth. Bane had used the last of his strength to force a pocket of air in his throat. Elias stopped. He spun around, his flashlight beam sweeping the white expanse. Bane! Bane, boy! The light passed over Maya's head. She blinked frantically, her eyelashes heavy with frost. Over here! She willed him. Elias saw it. A tiny flash of blue-gray, the reflection of a human eye in the darkness of the snow. He dived to his knees, his hands clawing at the ice. Maya! Oh God, Maya! He ripped the tape from her mouth. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She gasped out one single word. Bane. Save Bane. First. I've got you both, Elias sobbed, digging with a small folding shovel. I've got you. But as he cleared the snow around Maya's chest, a shadow fell over them. Elias froze. Standing 10 feet away was Mason. He hadn't left. He had been waiting in the tree line for the hero to show up. He held a suppressed rifle, the muzzle pointed directly at Elias's head. You should have gone to the lakeside, Elias, Mason said calmly. Now I have to dig 3 holes. The click of the safety being disengaged was louder than the storm. Maya looked at Mason, then at Elias, then at the spot where Bane was buried. She saw the snow shifting where the dog was. Bane wasn't just howling. He had been digging a tunnel beneath the surface. Mason, look behind you, Maya croaked. Her voice a ghostly whisper. The oldest trick in the book, Vance. Really? Mason sneered. But he didn't hear the snow fracture. He didn't see the sable-colored blur erupting from the drift like a demon from the underworld. Bain hadn't been trapped. He had been waiting for a target. The Malinois launched himself at Mason's throat just as the rifle fired. The bullet grazed Elias's shoulder, but the force of the dog sent Mason spiraling back into the deep quarry pit. A long, fading scream echoed as Mason disappeared into the darkness. Elias scrambled to Maya, pulling her up from the icy grave. She collapsed into his arms, her body shaking uncontrollably. Bain climbed out of his hole, limping, his muzzle bleeding, and crawled toward them. He rested his heavy head on Maya's lap. "We have to go," Elias panted, hoisting Maya up. "Mason's friends will be coming to check the site." "The evidence," Maya whispered, clutching Elias's jacket. "The receipt, in the SUV, it has the names." "I've got it," Elias promised. "But Maya, we aren't out yet. The road back to town is blocked by a deliberate landslide. We're trapped on this mountain with the rest of Mason's team." Maya looked at Bain, then at the burning orange glow of a fire in the distance. The church. The crown of pine were burning the evidence, and anyone inside. "Then we don't go back to town," Maya said, her Navy SEAL steel returning to her eyes despite the frostbite. "We go to the church. We finish this." As they struggled toward the SUV, the radio in Elias's pocket crackled to life. It wasn't the police. "Elias, this is the sheriff. We found your vehicle. Abandon it and surrender. Maya Vance is wanted for the murder of Agent Mason. If you are with her, you are considered armed and dangerous. Shoot to kill." The betrayal went all the way to the top. They were alone in the storm, hunted by the law, with nothing but a bleeding dog and a broken body to fight back. The SUV's heater groaned, fighting the frost that had begun to claim the interior glass as Maya huddled in the passenger seat, her body racking with violent, rhythmic shivers. Elias kept his eyes glued to the rearview mirror, watching for the sweep of headlights that would mean their death. "I can't believe the sheriff is in on this," he muttered, his voice thick with a mixture of rage and fear. Maya looked at her hands. They were a ghostly, translucent blue, the skin feeling like brittle parchment. She forced her lungs to expand, and each breath a sharp blade of ice. "It's not just the sheriff, Elias. It's the entire infrastructure. Mason didn't just turn, he was recruited. They've been using the quarry as a disposal site for months. If we don't get to that church, those kids aren't just going to be relocated. They're going to be erased." Bain let out a soft whine from the back, his head resting on a pile of tactical gear, his breathing ragged. Maya reached back, her fingers brushing his coarse fur. "We're not done yet, boy. Just a little further." The first mini-climax hit when the SUV suddenly lurched, the engine sputtering as the fuel line began to freeze. "No, no, no, not now!" Elias roared, slamming his fist against the dashboard. The vehicle died just as they reached the crest of a ridge, leaving them sitting ducks in a valley of white. "We have to move," Maya said, her SEAL training overriding the agony in her limbs. She kicked the door open, the wind nearly tearing it off its hinges. As they stepped out, the distant sound of snowmobiles echoed through the pines, high-pitched mechanical screams that signaled the hunt had begun. "They're coming," Elias whispered, grabbing his kit. "Maya, you can barely walk." She looked him dead in the eye, her blue-gray gaze burning with a terrifying intensity. "Then I'll crawl, but I'm taking Mason's head with me." They scrambled down the embankment, Bain leading the way despite his limp, his instincts sharp enough to find the paths where the snow was packed hardest. The psychological weight of the betrayal pressed on Maya more than the cold ever could. She thought of the years she had spent in the field with Mason, the times she had trusted him with her life. Every memory was now a poisoned well. "Elias, wait," Maya hissed, pulling him behind a massive cedar tree. A lone snowmobile had crested the ridge, its spotlight cutting through the dark like a predatory eye. The rider stopped, idling the engine, scanning the exact spot where they had abandoned the SUV. In a sudden, heart-stopping twist, the rider didn't call it in. Instead, he dismounted, walked to the SUV, and pulled out a canister of gasoline. Within seconds, their only means of escape was a roaring pyre, lighting up the sky and signaling their exact location to every hunter on the mountain. "He's forcing us toward the church," Maya realized, her voice trembling. "They want us in one place. They're hurting us." The rider turned, pulling off his goggles. It wasn't a stranger. It was Miller, the young deputy Maya had mentored just last summer. The betrayal was a virus, spreading through everyone she once called a friend. Maya felt a sob rise in her throat, not of grief, but of pure, unadulterated fury. "He's just a kid," Elias whispered. "He's a target," Maya snapped back, her heart hardening into a stone. They moved through the dense brush, the scent of smoke from the church now mixing with the sharp ozone of the storm. Every snap of a twig sounded like a gunshot. "Maya, your leg," Elias pointed out, noticing the dark stain blooming through her olive parka. The shrapnel from the rifle blast at the quarry had done more damage than she admitted. She didn't look down. "If I stop, I die. If I die, Bane dies. If Bane dies, those people in the church have no voice. Keep moving." The pace was grueling, a rhythmic torture of sinking into drifts and pulling themselves out. Suddenly, Bane stopped dead, a low rumble vibrating in his chest. He wasn't looking at the trail. He was looking up. Above them, on a rock outcropping, stood two men with thermal binoculars. "Thermal," Elias breathed, the color draining from his face. "We're glowing like light bulbs against this snow." They were trapped in a bowl of white with nowhere to hide. "The creek," Maya ordered, pointing toward a half-frozen stream 20 yards away. "The running water will mask our heat signature. Move!" They dived into the slushy, freezing water, the shock so intense Maya's heart skipped a beat. She pushed Bane into the reeds, covering him with her own body as the thermal scan passed over their heads. The silence was deafening, broken only by the sound of her own blood drumming in her ears. As the hunters moved on, Elias pulled Maya out of the water, her clothes instantly turning into a suit of ice. "You're going into shock," he warned, his voice cracking. "I can't lose you, Maya. Not like this." She grabbed his collar, her face inches from his. "You don't lose me. You use me. If I can't make it to the door, you use me as a distraction. You get Bane inside. He knows the scent of the accelerant they're using. He'll find the kids." The raw self-sacrifice in her voice made Elias flinch. This wasn't just survival. It was a scorched earth policy of the soul. They reached the perimeter of the church grounds, the old wooden structure glowing like a dying coal in the distance. But another twist awaited them at the gates. The crown of pine weren't just burning evidence. They were holding a perimeter with professional-grade claymore mines. Maya saw the tripwires, nearly invisible under the shifting snow. "Mason didn't just want us dead," she whispered, realizing the depth of the trap. "He wanted to make sure no one could ever come in or out to tell the story. This isn't a cover-up. It's an altar." Elias stepped forward, his boot inches from a wire. "Stop!" Maya screamed, her voice a jagged edge. She lunged forward, tackling him into a drift just as a flare went up, illuminating the entire yard. The sudden light revealed the horrifying truth. The sheriff's cruisers were parked in a circle around the burning building, their lights flashing blue and red. But no one was getting out to help. They were watching it burn. They were the audience to a massacre. "Look at them," Elias said, his voice hollow. "They're just waiting for the roof to collapse." Maya stood up, her frozen clothes cracking with every movement. She looked at Bain, whose amber eyes were fixed on the flaming steeple. "They think we're the prey," she said, her voice dropping to a low, lethal register. "They forgot what a seal does when she's cornered. They forgot that a K9 doesn't need light to find a throat." The drama intensified as a shadow detached itself from the line of police cars. It was Mason, his face bandaged from Bain's earlier attack, his eyes burning with a psychotic fervor. He held a megaphone to his lips. "Maya, I know you're out there. I can smell the failure on you. Come out and I'll make sure the dog dies quick. Otherwise..." I let the fire do the talking for the children inside. Maya's psychology shifted in that moment. The fear evaporated, replaced by a cold, calculated vacuum. She looked at Elias and signaled for the pincer movement they had practiced in 1,000 drills. "Bain, go," she whispered. The dog vanished into the shadows, a ghost in the night. Elias moved to the left, drawing his sidearm. Maya stayed center, walking out into the open, silhouetted by the fire of the burning SUV behind her. She looked like a vengeful spirit risen from the snow. "I'm right here, Mason," she yelled, her voice carrying over the wind. "Come and finish it." As Mason's men leveled their weapons at her, the final twist of the section struck. The witness Maya had been protecting, Rachel, appeared in the high belfry of the church, screaming. But she wasn't screaming for help. She was holding a canister of high-grade explosives the cult had stored there. "If I go, you all go," she shrieked. The hunters hesitated, their greed for life suddenly outweighing their orders. In that split second of confusion, Maya didn't dive for cover. She ran toward the line of fire. "Now! Elias, now!" The air was sucked out of the yard as a secondary explosion rocked the basement, but it wasn't the belfry. Bain had found the gas lines. The ground buckled, throwing the deputies off their feet. Maya didn't stop. She launched herself at the nearest guard, her movements a blur of desperate, lethal efficiency. The fight was no longer about the law. It was a primitive struggle for the very definition of humanity. "Hold the line!" Mason screamed, but the fire was no longer his ally. It was a hungry beast, and it was turning toward the men who had lit it. Maya reached the stairs of the church, her lungs screaming for air, her vision tunneling into a red haze. She looked back and saw Elias pinned down by heavy fire from the sheriff's cruiser. "Go!" Elias shouted, his voice nearly lost in the roar of the flames. "Get the kids. I'll hold them off." Maya hesitated for a heartbeat. The man she loved against the lives of the innocent. It was a choice no one should ever have to make, a psychological fracture that would never truly heal. She turned and ran into the inferno, Bain at her side, leaving Elias to face the wall of lead alone. The heat hit her like a physical wall, melting the ice on her skin into a scalding steam as she disappeared into the smoke. The heat inside the church was a living entity, a suffocating wall of orange and black that stripped the moisture from Maya's throat the moment she crossed the threshold. "Bain, find them! Find the scent!" She coughed, pressing a wet sleeve against her mouth as the ceiling groaned above them. The dog didn't hesitate. He lowered his head, his powerful legs churning through the smoke-filled air as he navigated the labyrinth of burning pews. Every crackle of the timber sounded like a bone breaking, a psychological assault that made Maya's Navy SEAL training feel like a distant, fragile memory. She wasn't an elite soldier right now. She was a desperate woman running into a furnace for souls that the world had already written off. The first mini-climax shattered the silence when a burning support beam collapsed inches behind Maya, cutting off her only exit. She didn't look back. She couldn't. "Keep going, Bane," she urged, her voice a jagged rasp. They reached the altar, where the heat was so intense the gold-leafed icons were melting, dripping like tears down the scorched wood. Bane began to bay, a sharp, urgent sound directed at a heavy iron grate on the floor. The cellar, Maya realized, her heart hammering. She threw her weight against the iron, but it was locked from the outside. A deliberate, cold-blooded decision to ensure no one escaped the fire. "Help! Is anyone down there?" she screamed, pounding the metal with her bruised fists. A thin, terrified voice drifted up through the gaps. "Please! The smoke is coming in! We can't breathe!" It was a child, her voice small and brittle. Maya felt a surge of raw, protective adrenaline. She looked around for a tool, anything to break the lock, when the second mini-climax struck. A backdraft exploded in the vestibule, sending a wave of fire rolling across the ceiling like a tidal wave. "Get back from the grate!" Maya yelled to the voices below. She grabbed a heavy brass candelabra and swung it with every ounce of her remaining strength. The lock held. She swung again, her muscles screaming in protest. On the third strike, the bolt sheared off, and she hauled the heavy iron door open. 12 children and the elderly pastor Eli were huddled in the darkness, their eyes wide with a terror that no human should ever witness. "Up! Everyone up now!" Maya commanded, her voice regaining the authority of a commander. She began hoisting the children out one by one, passing them to Bane, who nudged them toward the center of the room where the air was marginally clearer. But as she reached for the last child, a major twist derailed her plan. The floor beneath the altar began to sag. It wasn't just the fire. The crown of pine had rigged the support pillars with thermite. They weren't just burning the church. They were erasing the foundation. "Maya, the stairs are gone!" Pastor Eli cried out, pointing toward the roaring abyss where the entrance had been. The exit was a wall of flame. Maya scanned the room, her mind racing through tactical escape routes. "The belfry," she said, looking up at the wooden ladder leading to the bell tower. "It's the only part of the structure with stone reinforcement. Move!" They scrambled up the narrow ladder, Bane nipping at the heels of the slower children to keep them moving. Just as Maya reached the top, the floor below them gave way completely, sheeting falling into a pit of fire that looked like the mouth of hell. They were trapped 40 feet in the air, the wind howling through the open arches of the bell tower. Below, Maya could see the flickering lights of the sheriff's cruisers. She expected to see Elias fighting, but what she saw instead sent a chill deeper than the Colorado frost. Elias was on his knees in the snow, his hands behind his head, with a deputy holding a shotgun to his ear. Mason was standing over him, looking up at the belfry with a distorted, monstrous grin. He picked up the megaphone again. "A beautiful view to die for, isn't it, Maya? You saved them just in time to watch them fall." Maya's psychology shifted from survival to cold, calculated retribution. She looked at the heavy bronze bell hanging above them. "Pastor," "Help me with the rope," she whispered. "Oh, children, get behind the stone pillar and hold on to Bane. Don't let go, no matter what." The children huddled against the dog, who stood like a statue, his amber eyes never leaving Maya. She and Eli grabbed the thick hemp rope of the great bell. "On 3, she grunted. 1, 2, 3. They pulled with their collective weight, but they weren't ringing for prayer. They were using the bell as a counterweight. In a staggering twist of physics and desperation, Maya had noticed the bell's carriage was bolted to the same stone spine that held the exterior fire escape. If she could drop the bell, the tension would rip the rusted fire escape ladder free from the ice, swinging it toward the belfry. It was a 1 in a million shot. The bell groaned, its ancient metal protesting, and then it plummeted. The stone tower shook as if an earthquake had hit. The fire escape ladder shrieked as it tore loose from the frozen brick, swinging through the air like a giant pendulum. It slammed into the belfry ledge with a bone-jarring thud. "Go now!" Maya shoved the children toward the swaying metal. One by one, they descended the icy rungs, disappearing into the smoke below where the fire hadn't yet reached the outer wall. But as the last child reached the ground, the fire escape groaned. The bolts were stripping. "Pastor, you're next," Maya ordered. The old man shook his head, his eyes fixed on the flames licking at his feet. "Save the dog, Maya. I've lived my life." Maya grabbed his collar, her face inches from his. "Nobody stays behind. Not on my watch." She forced him onto the ladder just as the stone pillar cracked. The final mini-climax of the descent happened when the ladder partially detached, leaving Maya and Bane stranded at the top. The gap was now 10 feet of empty, fiery air. "Jump! Bane!" she screamed. The Malinois didn't hesitate. He leaped across the abyss, his claws scratching for purchase on the twisted metal. Maya caught his harness, her arm nearly wrenching from its socket as she hauled him onto the remaining section of the ladder. She followed, her boots slipping on the melted ice, the heat at her back singing her hair. When they hit the ground, they weren't met with safety. They were met with the barrel of a rifle. Mason had walked away from Elias, leaving him to the deputies, and was now standing at the base of the ladder. "You really are a cockroach, Vance," he spat, his face a mask of ash and hatred. He leveled the rifle at her chest. But even cockroaches fry. He pulled the trigger, but the only sound was a hollow click. The freezing temperatures had jammed the firing pin of his high-end rifle. In that moment of mechanical failure, Maya didn't wait. She lunged forward, her SEAL training manifesting in a flurry of strikes that sent the rifle spinning into the snow. They tumbled into the drifts, a primal struggle of hands and teeth. Mason was larger, fueled by a psychotic adrenaline, but Maya was fueled by the faces of the children she had just pulled from the fire. She felt his fingers close around her throat, cutting off her air. Her vision began to spot. "Die, you bitch!" Mason hissed, his weight crushing her into the frozen earth. Suddenly, a weight left her chest. She gasped for air, her eyes fluttering open to see Bane. The dog hadn't run for cover. He had lunged at Mason's shoulder, his jaws locking onto the joint with a crushing force. Mason screamed, a sound that cut through the roar of the fire. He tried to shake the dog off, but Bane was a living anchor. Maya rolled away, her hand finding a heavy piece of discarded iron from the fallen fire escape. She didn't hesitate. She swung the iron into Mason's temple, the impact echoing like a gavel. Mason went limp, falling back into the snow, his eyes staring blankly at the burning church he had created. Maya stood up, her body trembling, her lungs burning with every breath. She looked toward the cruisers and saw a sight that broke her heart. Elias was gone. The spot where he had been kneeling was empty, save for a pool of dark blood and a single, discarded shell casing. The deputies were retreating into their cars, the sirens wailing as they fled the scene of the crime they had allowed to happen. "Elias!" Maya screamed, her voice breaking. She ran toward the bloodstain, her mind spinning with a frantic, terrifying question. Was he dead? Had they taken him? She looked at Bane, who was sniffing the blood, his ears pinned back. The dog let out a low, mournful howl that vibrated in Maya's chest. The crown of pine had been defeated. The children were safe with Pastor Eli. But the man who had dug her out of the snow was lost in the blackness of the Colorado night. She stood in the center of the graveyard of ice and ash, the realization hitting her like a physical blow. The war wasn't over. It had just moved into the shadows. The sirens faded into a ghostly wail, leaving Maya standing in a wasteland of black ash and crystalline snow. She looked down at the bloodstain where Elias had been. It was already starting to crust over in the sub-zero wind. "He's not dead, Bane. They wouldn't just kill him and leave the body if they wanted to send a message," she whispered, her voice cracking with a desperate hope she didn't truly feel. Bane paced the perimeter of the bloodstain, his hackles raised, his nose twitching as he caught a scent that made him let out a low, vibrating growl. It wasn't just blood. It was the metallic tang of high-grade sedative. They hadn't executed him. They had harvested him. The first mini-climax hit when Maya reached into the snow and pulled out Elias's cracked radio. A voice crackled through the static, cold, and devoid of any humanity. "Agent Vance, you're a hard woman to bury. But Elias is currently in the back of a transport heading for the Blackwood Tunnel. If you want him to see the sunrise, you'll stop playing hero and bring the evidence to the ridge." Maya gripped the radio so hard the plastic groaned. "If you touch him, there won't be enough left of you to bury," she hissed. The line went dead. She looked at Bane, the psychological weight of the choice pressing down on her. The children were safe with Pastor Eli, but the man who had pulled her from the ice was being driven into a death trap. "Pastor, take the children to the old mill. Don't stop for anyone," Maya commanded, not looking back as she limped toward a discarded snowmobile near the church gates. She hot-wired the ignition, the engine roaring to life with a mechanical scream. Just as she was about to pull away, a major twist stopped her heart. A small hand grabbed her sleeve. It was the girl she had saved from the cellar, holding out a small, jagged piece of metal. "The man with the bandage. He dropped this when the dog bit him," the girl whispered. It was a key card, embossed with a logo that didn't belong to the sheriff's department or the Crown of Pine. It belonged to Aegis North, a private military contractor. The conspiracy wasn't local. It was corporate. Maya tucked the card into her tactical vest, her mind racing. "Bane, load up!" The Malinois leaped onto the back of the snowmobile, his paws digging into the seat for balance. They tore off into the whiteout, the wind whipping Maya's hair into a frantic tangle of ice. Every bump in the road sent a jolt of agony through her injured leg, but she pushed the throttle to the stop. She was no longer just a victim of a cult. She was a SEAL on an interception course. As they neared the Blackwood Tunnel, she saw the silhouette of a black armored transport van weaving through the drifts. The drama spiked as a second vehicle, a modified Jeep with a mounted spotlight, swerved out from a hidden logging road, ramming the side of Maya's snowmobile. She veered wildly, nearly losing Bane to the frozen ravine below. "Hold on, boy," she yelled, leaning into the turn and drawing her sidearm. She fired 3 shots into the Jeep's tire, the rubber shredding instantly. The Jeep flipped, tumbling into the trees in a spectacular shower of sparks and snow. Maya didn't stop to check for survivors. She had 5 minutes before the transport reached the tunnel, a place where GPS signals died and bodies disappeared forever. In a profound twist of betrayal, the transport van suddenly slowed down, its back doors swinging open. Maya expected a hail of gunfire, but instead a body was shoved out onto the moving road. It was Elias. He was bound and gagged, rolling like a rag doll across the ice. Maya slammed on her brakes, the snowmobile sliding sideways as she leaped off to reach him. "Elias! Elias, talk to me!" she cried, ripping the gag from his mouth. He gasped for air, his eyes wide with a frantic warning. "Maya, get away! It's a lure!" The mini cliffhanger struck as a red laser dot appeared on Elias's chest, then moved to Maya's forehead. A sniper was positioned on the tunnel's overhang. "Down!" Maya tackled Elias into the ditch, just as a heavy-caliber round punched a hole through the snowmobile's fuel tank. The machine exploded, creating a wall of fire that briefly obscured them from the shooter. "They're not trying to kill us yet," Elias panted, his face bruised and bloody. "They want the key card you took from the girl. It's the encryption key for their offshore servers." Maya felt the weight of the card against her ribs. It was no longer just a piece of plastic. It was a death warrant. "We have to get to the tunnel's maintenance shaft," she whispered, looking at the sniper's position. "Bane, flanking maneuver, go!" The dog vanished into the tree line, his dark fur making him nearly invisible in the shadows. Maya and Elias crawled through the freezing slush, using the smoke from the burning snowmobile as a screen. The psychological tension was a physical cord stretched to the breaking point. Every heartbeat felt like a countdown. Suddenly, the sniper's fire stopped. A scream echoed from the ridge, followed by the unmistakable sound of a Malinois in full combat mode. Bane had reached the nest. Maya stood up, ignoring the protest of her mangled leg. "Let's go, Elias. We're taking that van." They ran toward the transport, which was idling near the tunnel entrance. But as they reached the driver's door, another twist hit them. The driver was already dead, slumped over the wheel with a single professional needle mark in his neck. This wasn't Mason's work. This was a cleanup crew. "They're erasing their own people," Elias realized, his voice trembling. "They're burning the whole trail." As they climbed into the van, Maya saw a countdown timer on the dashboard. 60 seconds. The van was rigged with a thermobaric charge. "Out! Everyone out!" Maya shoved Elias back into the snow and dived for Bane, who was just returning from the ridge. They hit the ground and rolled into a concrete drainage pipe just as the van vanished in a localized sun. The shock wave rattled Maya's teeth, and for a moment, the world went silent. The silence was broken by the sound of a helicopter. A heavy, dual-rotor Chinook was hovering over the quarry, its searchlights bathing the landscape in a cold, artificial day. "They're bringing in the heavy hitters," Maya said, her eyes narrowing as she watched the silhouettes of repelling soldiers. She looked at Elias, then at Bane. They were cold, injured, and outgunned, but she had the card, and she had the training. "Elias, can you still shoot?" He gripped a discarded pistol, his hand shaking but his gaze steady. So I'll shoot until I run out of fingers, Maya. The section's final hook dropped when Maya's radio, still clutched in her hand, picked up a new frequency. It wasn't the sheriff, and it wasn't the contractor. It was a voice she hadn't heard in years, her former CO from the SEAL teams. Vance, we've been tracking the Aegis signal. You're in deep, and we're 10 minutes out. But the Pentagon just issued a stand-down order. We're being pulled back. You're on your own, Maya. Do you copy? You are officially disavowed. Maya stared at the radio. The betrayal of her own government hitting harder than any bullet. She was a woman without a country, standing in a frozen graveyard with a loyal dog and a broken friend, while an army descended from the sky. She looked at the belfry of the church, still glowing in the distance, and then at the dark mouth of the tunnel. Disavowed, she whispered, a grim, lethal smile touching her lips. Good. That means I don't have to follow the rules anymore. She looked at Bain, who let out a sharp, affirmative bark. The hunt was no longer about survival. It was about scorched earth justice. The Chinook's rotors thrashed the freezing air into a chaotic vortex, the downdraft screaming like a choir of the damned as Maya Vance stood amidst the wreckage of the transport van. She looked at the radio in her hand, the device that had just delivered the ultimate betrayal from the government she had bled for. Disavowed, she repeated, the word tasting like copper and ash. Elias stepped beside her, his face a map of bruises, his hand gripping a scavenged tactical rifle. What does that mean for us, Maya? She looked at Bain, whose fur was matted with ice and dried blood, his amber eyes fixed on the repelling soldiers. It means we aren't soldiers anymore, Elias. We're the consequences. The first mini-climax ignited as the first pair of Aegis North contractors hit the ground, their boots crunching on the permafrost. They didn't issue a warning. They opened fire. Bullets chewed into the concrete drainage pipe, sending shards of stone flying like shrapnel. Bain, Shadow! Maya barked. The dog didn't lung. He melted into the darkness of the pipe, circling around the rear. Maya leaned out, her vision tunneling as she fired 2 precise shots. One contractor crumpled, the other dove for cover. They think we're trapped, Maya hissed, her heart hammering against her ribs. They don't realize we've been living in the dark for hours. This is our territory now. As they retreated deeper into the maintenance tunnel of the Blackwood Passage, the psychological pressure of the chase began to fracture Elias. Maya, they have thermal, they have air support, and we have a dog and a broken leg. We can't win this. Maya grabbed his tactical vest, pulling him close until their foreheads touched. You listen to me? They want that card because it's the only thing that can burn their empire down. That means they can't just blow the tunnel. They have to come in and get it. And in a tunnel, numbers don't mean a damn thing. Only will does. The raw conviction in her voice acted like a splint for his broken spirit. A major twist shifted the stakes when they reached the central junction. Instead of more soldiers, they found a laptop humming on an equipment crate, its screen glowing with a live feed. It wasn't the quarry or the church. It was the interior of the old mill where Maya had sent the children. Mason wasn't dead. He was on the screen, his head bandaged, holding the girl Maya had saved. I told you, Maya, the snow is patient. Mason's voice oozed through the speakers. Bring the card to the tunnel mouth in 5 minutes, or the mill becomes a funeral pyre. The drama surged as Maya realized Mason had used the Chinook as a distraction to circle back to the innocents. You monster, she whispered. She looked at the keycard, then at Bain. The dog let out a low, mournful whine, sensing her agony. Elias, take the card. Head for the emergency exit at the north end. Get to a high-ground transmitter and upload the data. Don't stop for anything. Elias stared at her. What about you? Maya's face was a mask of cold stone. I'm going to give Mason exactly what he wants. A face-to-face. The second mini-climax exploded as Maya stepped out of the tunnel mouth, her hands raised, the snow swirling around her like a shroud. The Chinook's searchlight blinded her, pinning her in a circle of white. Two contractors moved in, roughly zip-tying her wrists. "Where's the dog?" one of them growled, slamming the butt of his rifle into her ribs. Maya gasped, the air leaving her lungs in a cloud of frost. "He ran," she lied, her voice a jagged edge. "He's smarter than I am." They dragged her toward a black SUV idling near the ridge. In a profound twist that shattered the enemy's confidence, the SUV didn't contain Mason. It was empty, rigged with the same thermal dampening tech they had used to hide their quarry operations. Suddenly, the contractor holding Maya's arm was jerked backward into the darkness. A single wet crunch echoed through the trees. Bain hadn't stayed with Elias. He had been tracking the scent of the men who touched his master. Maya didn't wait. She used the tension of the zip ties to pivot, driving her heel into the second guard's kneecap. As he went down, she snatched the knife from his belt and sliced her bonds in one fluid motion. "Bain, to me!" she yelled. The Malinois erupted from the brush, his jaws clamped onto a tactical vest he had ripped from a fallen soldier. But the cliffhanger hit immediately. A second helicopter, a smaller scout bird, dipped low, its door gunner racking a heavy machine gun. The snow around Maya erupted in fountains of white. She dove behind the SUV, the metal groaning under the onslaught. "Elias, if you're going to do it now!" she screamed into her radio. The rhythm of the battle shifted as a massive burst of static drowned out the helicopter's engine. Elias hadn't just reached a transmitter. He had triggered the Crown of Pine emergency broadcast system, flooding every frequency in the county with the raw data from the keycard. The names of the senators, the bank accounts, the coordinates of the burial sites. It began scrolling across every screen in the region. The hunter was suddenly the hunted. The scout bird wavered, the pilot distracted by the sudden loss of encrypted comms. Maya seized the moment of chaos. She climbed into the driver's seat of the SUV, Bain leaping into the back. "Hold on! Boy!" She rammed the vehicle into gear, flooring it toward the old mill. The chase was a blur of high-speed turns and near misses on the icy cliffs. The helicopter stayed on her tail, the gunner straining to lead the target. Maya realized she couldn't outrun the air support. She had to ground it. The final major twist occurred as she approached the mill. Instead of a burning building, she saw the local townspeople, the ones who had stayed silent for years, standing in the road with hunting rifles and shotguns. Pastor Eli stood at the front, the children tucked safely behind a stone wall. They weren't hiding anymore. The broadcast had woken the town. The helicopter pilot, seeing 100 witnesses with cameras and guns, pulled up, the risk of a public massacre outweighing the corporate contract. Maya slammed the SUV to a halt and vaulted out, her eyes searching the crowd. Mason was there, trying to slip away in the confusion. She didn't use a gun. She ran him down, her boots heavy on the packed snow. She tackled him into the drifts, the very place he had tried to bury her. They rolled in a frantic struggle of limbs and gasping breaths. Mason reached for a hidden shiv, but Maya caught his wrist, her SEAL training turning his own momentum against him. You said the snow was patient, Mason, she hissed, her face inches from his. But it's also cold, and it never forgets a debt. She didn't kill him. She pinned him down as the sound of real sirens, state police and federal agents not on the Aegis payroll, finally filled the valley. Mason looked at her, his eyes full of a coward's fear. You're disavowed, Maya. You have nothing. She looked over her shoulder at Elias, who was walking toward her, and at Bain, who stood guard over the children. She looked at the community that had finally found its spine. I have everything I need, she said. The psychological release was a flood of warmth that defied the Colorado winter. Maya stood up, her body screaming in pain, her soul finally finding a moment of silence. She watched as the federal agents swarmed the mill, taking Mason and the remaining contractors into custody. Elias reached her, putting a heavy wool blanket over her shoulders. It's over, Maya. The data is out. There's no taking it back. She leaned against him, her strength finally failing. Bain sat at her feet, leaning his weight against her leg, his tail thumping once against the snow. The story of the female Navy SEAL and her K-9 didn't end in a grave or a headline. It ended in the quiet, steady breath of survivors. They had been buried under the weight of a conspiracy, frozen by betrayal, and left for dead in the dark. But the rescue wasn't too late because the heart doesn't stop beating just because the world goes cold. Maya looked at the rising sun, the light turning the snowy peaks into gold. She was no longer a soldier of the state. She was a guardian of the truth. True loyalty is not a command given, but a promise kept in the silence of the snow.